Everything hurts. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, Reading in the Dark. It's not dark in here, but it's happening. So I am currently home from work with a back injury, which is awesome. I have scar tissue in my back from an injury. I sprained my back many years ago and it's coming back. Anyway, so for the next few days, I'm just gonna be stuck at home. So I was going to edit my video that was like a wrap up from my Thriller-A-Thon, and I don't know what was wrong with me that day, but it is the most boring video I've ever seen. So I'm kind of letting it all hang out in this video today. I'm sort of done with, that's better. I'm kind of done with like obsessing so much over my setup, and I'm stuck at home and everything hurts. Like, it hurts to stand up, it hurts to sit down. Like, I just don't have the patience to be sitting in my office and editing a video of a boring person talking about books. I'm just gonna do it over. And Thriller-A-Thon was a few weeks ago. I'll put the date. The Thriller-A-Thon was this time. The date that I'm gonna look up later and put on this video. I don't remember when it was. Let's see, there were challenges. One of them was to read the book that's been in your TBR the longest. That was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I've had this book for years. To read the book that's been in your TBR was the most recent add to your TBR, and I believe that was Still House Lake by Rachel Kane. To read the book with the best cover, that was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. To revisit an author or a specific book or series, and that was Gravity by Tess Gerritsen. Oh, and then to read the book that you're most anticipating, and that was Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. So is that right? We've got Frankenstein, Gravity, All Systems Red, Still House Lake, and Woman in the Window. That's 5, yeah. So those are my books. It's 5 books in 7 days, which was more manageable than Booktube-A-Thon. So I'm just gonna start at the beginning. I bought this Barnes & Noble Classics edition of Frankenstein. Here it is. It's very interesting cover, like a flayed hand situation. It's got those deckled edges, which I think are really cool. And I bought it a long time ago in New York. It was like 2008, maybe. So I've had it on my shelf for a long time, and I was like, oh, this counts as a thriller, right? Kind of. And it's not like the challenges are like super strict, so I read it. It's not exactly a thriller. It's gothic horror, and I have hot chocolate. I liked Frankenstein fine. I didn't love it. I really enjoyed this book in that I like the writing style from back then in the days. You know, I really love Bram Stoker's Dracula, the book, not the movie. The movie's weird. I like the writing style of Mary Shelley in this book. I did not feel that the narrator, whose name, oh God, is it Victor? I'm questioning everything now. Yeah, Victor. Obviously, Victor Frankenstein. I didn't find him whiny and annoying and terrible. Some people have said they really hate him. I liked him fine. He reminded me a little bit of the narrator in Dracula. What I didn't like was the really lengthy story within a story section where the monster tells his story of, you know, being rejected by Frankenstein and going off on his own in the woods, sort of observes this cabin with these sort of refugees that have their own complicated political backstory that's boring in the book, so I'm not going to bore you with it here. And he watches them through the window from like across the way and learns to speak the language from watching them speak it. It's ridiculous because it felt like it was trying too hard to justify the details of like how he learned to do anything, really, speak and communicate and understand what things were, because at the end of the day, none of it was believable. Even knowing that I was reading Frankenstein, I was sitting there like, this is dumb. It just strained credibility. This is a story that is really over the top, and so any attempt to go into detail and justify things on a concrete basis like that fails and makes it more silly. This book works best when it's sort of glossing over technical details and glossing over logistics and just cutting right to the inner struggles and the larger themes. I thought it was interesting that he was so doggedly pursuing this goal. I thought it was interesting that somebody could pursue something with wonder and fascination and desire for a long time, and then once they see it actually happen and literally come to life, then that they would say, oh shit. It was well written, and so I liked that, but I feel like the overall theme that I got from this was that too much discovery, too much knowledge for man is bad. Science is bad and leads to bad things, and there are certain things that should be left to God. And she spends a lot of time describing these beautiful majestic vistas of mountain ranges and whatnot, things that were created by God, and not so subtly contrasts that with Frankenstein's disgust at his own creation. I did think it was heartbreaking how he immediately rejected the monster, but at the same time, I thought the portrayal of the monster itself was really silly. There were moments in this book that reminded me of Dracula in terms of the writing style being very verbose and sort of redundant, but they annoyed me more in this book than they do in Dracula. There was also this aspect of this woman, Elizabeth, who was just basically offered in marriage to Victor Frankenstein at one point by someone else. Up until that point, no one had ever suggested that she was interested in marrying anyone, and she never expressed any romantic feelings towards him at all until she was just basically offered. And then all of a sudden she was in love with him, and I thought that came out of nowhere. And the character is another one of these female characters that really only exists to inspire the hero. She doesn't do anything except exist and be beautiful and be an object of desire and an object of anguish later. And it's annoying to me. I hate that. Again, this book was written millions of years ago. But for those aspects, a lot of the book was boring to me and was unable to transcend its shortcomings in the way that Dracula does for me. The book talks about interesting themes. The overall thesis, if we can call it that, man should know his place and not try to do things that are the realm of the gods, that kind of thing, science is bad, is one that I don't necessarily agree with. And I'm probably, maybe I'm superimposing that on this book. Maybe it wasn't intended. Maybe that's not what other people get. That's what I got, and it kind of annoyed me. So although I enjoyed the writing style, the book ended up feeling a little bit long. I gave it 3 stars because I think I will read it again, but it's not my favorite. I enjoyed it. I actually read this partially in this book, in this binding, and I also partially read it on my Kindle, and I also partially listened to it on an audiobook, a really beautiful audiobook production that stars Dan Stevens from Downton Abbey as the narrator, and he does a really great job. So if you love Frankenstein and you haven't had an audiobook of it yet, I recommend that one because it's really well produced. So, Frankenstein. All right, so then the next book I read was All Systems Red by Martha Wells, which I didn't realize was a novella. It's the first in a series about a robot that's a security robot called who calls himself or itself Murderbot. Murderbot is uncomfortable around people, is sort of has social anxiety in a way, as a robot is uncomfortable being around human beings because they are always trying to engage him in conversation and try to humanize him a little bit, and he's not human and he doesn't want to have chit chat. All he wants to do is continually consume TV shows and movies and old things like media entertainment that he's downloaded from the database in chunks to his own internal memory, and spends most of his time just like watching like Bewitched or like I think there's specific references to certain TV shows and movies and stuff that he's watching while all of this is going on, and it's all really anachronistic for the futuristic world that he's in, and therefore very funny that he's watching those things. I keep calling him he because I'm a dude, and so when I read this character which is very genderless for some reason, I just read him as a guy, probably because I'm a guy, but I don't know. The character is very funny and has a job to do. He has to protect these people. There's some shit that goes down. They're like miners, and there's a few different expeditions from the same group or the same company, and one of the other ones isn't responding, and something bad has happened, and they go to figure out what happened, and there's a conspiracy and all of this stuff, and there's violence and action, and he has to defend them and protect them. And he just has a really funny sense of humor and a sense of devotion to these people who are trying to engage with him on a level that he's initially uncomfortable with, but then he gets a little bit more comfortable with. It was just charming and adorable, and I really loved it. As in terms of science fiction, I thought it was brilliant because not only was it action-oriented and entertaining, but it also had things to say about our world and about people who are introverted and the anxiety that comes from social interaction and respecting people's boundaries that way. And I thought the book had a beautiful ending that is super, super valid and has a lesson to teach us about ourselves. And that's the highest aspiration for science fiction, in my view. And so I loved it. And although it's not a book that necessarily changes the world, I don't see how it could have been any better. And that was my favorite cover, by the way. And so I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. 5 stars. And I will read more of the novellas in this series. Third book that I read for Thriller-A-Thon was was it Stillhouse Lake? Yes, Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane. Okay, so this book was it's not a lot to say about it. It's a very cliched premise. There is a woman, her husband in the past turned out to be a serial killer. He was murdering people in their garage, which he had converted into a workshop, the windows taken out and covered with bricks, and he had the garage door also taken out and replaced with a brick wall, and there's just like one door with like a padlock on it and lots of locks. And he would spend a lot of time in there working on things, and occasionally would come back with like stuff for the house that he built. But generally speaking, what he was doing in there was a big mystery, but the wife didn't have any questions about it. I don't know. I mean, sometimes we're surprised by what people will look the other way and not really think about in real life. So to have this woman not ask the right questions and to have something like this happening right under her nose, it sounds ridiculous, and maybe it's actually just crazy enough to be plausible. Maybe that kind of thing would happen, but it does strain credibility. And she gets that reaction from people throughout the book while she's on the run, who like, you didn't know that was happening in your own house. So the book tries to address that to varying levels of success. That's the premise. She's on the run. She doesn't want to be found because there are trolls on the internet, sort of like the Nancy Grace crowd on these creepy forums, who assume that she knew what was going on and covered it up. And they, plague her with disgusting emails and Photoshop pictures of her kids being killed and her being the one to kill them, just like terrible things. And she has to constantly change her phone number and move and stuff because she's just being hounded by people. And we do live in a culture where people are guilty until proven innocent, especially in the court of public opinion. There's lots of cases that happen and play out over the television, and people just assume whoever's been charged with something is guilty, and no matter what happens with the court case, they will continue to feel that way. So that part was insightful and interesting. However, the cliche of this woman being on the run and having to constantly move and change her kid's school and her kids resenting her for it, yada, 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 was very, very tired and overdone. And like the lioness mother who will do anything to save her kids, also a cliche that I'm tired of reading about. It just reinforces this idea that the most noble aspiration that a woman can have, or the greatest expression of womanhood through which a woman will attain her greatest power, is to be a mother. So this is just another one of those tropes that I am annoyed by. Sorry. There's dialogue in this that is like not okay. Like, she drives down the street and there's like a fire and she realizes it's her own house and she says like, oh no, how awful. Rachel Kane has written lots of things and she's very popular. This was a bad first book for me to try because I really thought the writing was shit. Sorry, it's my back pain talking. I'm being a jerk. But I thought the writing was terrible. Of course, it's part of a trilogy. In the literary world, nobody can write a book anymore without it being part of a trilogy. It's like a new law. If I could, I would bang my head on the table right now, but that would send me into spasms of pain. So I got through this book very easily. It was a very quick read. It was very mediocre. It was fine. I didn't really like it that much. I will not read it again. It was mediocre. I didn't love it. I gave it 2 stars. That was the third book. The fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth book that I read was Tess Gerritsen's Gravity, and this was the challenge that says to read a book or reread an author, series, or book. Gravity is the first book by Tess Gerritsen that I ever read. Actually, it wasn't. It was the first book that I heard about, and it's the reason I started reading her, and by extension, the reason I started reading again in 2008. Tess Gerritsen was a medical doctor before she became an author, and she did a ton of research. That's my ice maker. She did a ton of research in writing this book about a virus that is inadvertently introduced through an experiment that is sent up on a shuttle mission to the International Space Station. And the doctor who is a member of that particular mission's crew, that's the water pump in my refrigerator. I'm just going to have some hot chocolate. There we go. So she's a doctor, astronaut on the International Space Station, and a virus is killing people. There is a ton of like medical detail and like scientific detail about like the space program and I think it's the space shuttle and the ISS for sure. And it's so vivid because she did so much research and there's so much detail. This is a great book. It is a mystery. It is a thriller. It is a sci-fi story because the space program and the way they get there and the ISS itself, I think, is all accurate. So that's not fiction. The medical aspect of it with the virus is the fictional part. I don't know. It places you very, very clearly in that world, with a lot of legit gritty detail, and including a side story with this sort of like SpaceX-esque sort of private startup. So the world feels very legit, and as a result, the drama with the danger of the virus is very compelling. And that's what Tess Gerritsen does really well, and that's what all thriller writers should do well, is to place you in a world that is 100% real and believable and recognizable. And if not recognizable, if it's fantastic, then just to make it really, really vivid, and then introduce the threat. The characters are a little bit paint by numbers. There's, like a separated married couple who have lingering feelings for one another. It's, it's not new ground exactly, but they're well written. The book, I don't know, it's just an excellent thriller. And I just love Tess Gerritsen. And so this book was my second reading of it, and I gave it 4 stars. The final book that I read was was Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. And I should just do a whole nother video about this book. This book was fine. I think that it was largely only successful in that it was a rehash of Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock film. People have said, oh, it has similarities to Rear Window. And I'm like, no, it just is Rear Window. Also, if you've seen the musical Next to Normal, this is basically Rear Window meets Next to Normal in ways that I will not go into. It was an entertaining read. I got through it real quick. I enjoyed it. All of the aspects of this book which were original were like changing genders, and the detail of the neighbor that's the killer is different, of course, but whatever. I mean, it's just like if you've seen the film Disturbia starring Shia LaBeouf, it's Rear Window. It's just an updated adaptation of it, and that's what Woman in the Window is. And he even mentions the film. He refers to lots of like classic film properties like Rear Window, and they're woven really well into the story. And I suppose that was clever because he knew people were going to make that comparison, so he figured he would just address the elephant in the room and literally have the character watching Rear Window. But I don't know, like there's only a certain amount of kudos I can give him for that, because at the end of the day, this book is only entertaining because of its premise, which it borrowed from things that came before it. I don't think this book would exist. I don't think this book would have been written if the film Rear Window did not exist. I also want to say quickly, because this video is getting long, there is an attitude about women that is pervasive throughout this book that I find a little disturbing. Most of the problems in this book stem from mistakes and failings of the women in the story. Everything bad that happens is somehow a tributary result of something bad that this awful woman or this awful woman or this awful woman did. But it's interesting to me that with that sort of being at the center of all the problems in this story, that as a adaptation of Rear Window, the main change that A.J. Finn made was to take the central character and make it a woman. Why couldn't it have been a man, just like in every other version of this story? A, probably because he wanted it to be different. But B, if you read the book and you know a lot of details about what's really going on with this woman's agoraphobia, him not having a high level of regard for women is a pretty good explanation for why he needed to change that main character to a female. So, I don't know. I just couldn't help but be struck by that just sort of prevailing undercurrent the whole time I read it. And that, coupled with the fact that there's very little originality in the story, it's hard to say why books become really huge hits, but this one is, and I don't completely think it should be. It's just Rear Window. They're making a movie of it starring Amy Adams, and I'm curious to see it because it's just going to be another remake of Rear Window. I was not surprised by almost anything in this book. The major reveals, none of them were a surprise, and I was bothered by an undercurrent of misogyny and extreme unoriginality, which robbed me of being able to really, really recommend this book. I think I gave it 3 stars because I thought the writing was fine. It was paced well and stuff. I enjoyed the description of the brownstone she lives in and all of that. But it's just, I would like to read something else by this author, maybe. I just can't recommend it. So it's 3 stars, and really it's maybe kind of 2.5 stars. So that was my Thriller-A-Thon. I then tried to join Contemporary-A-Thon and had a bad experience, and I'll get into that into another video. But in any case, this was my second readathon in 1 month. I started it before I'd even finished Booktube-A-Thon. It's probably not the greatest choice, but you know, I enjoy thrillers. I'll do Thriller-A-Thon again next year for sure. In fact, I think they do it more than once a year. So I'm going to link to Harriet Rosie's channel in the description below because she is the host. She was the host for this readathon. I'm going to be doing a little video on Blindness by Jose Saramago, which is the one book that I read in my Contemporary-A-Thon. And I have lots of feelings on that book as well. I would love to read a book that I love soon. That'd be great. And then some basic booktubery will be happening as I will probably be very productive on my channel in the next few days while I am stuck at home with heating pads and ice packs and whatnot. In any case, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was rather lengthy and very, very late. I hope you enjoy my new location, and if you do, let me know. It's a little bit more interesting than just a black background, although with Halloween coming up, I sort of like things being dark. So I'm trying to think about what I want to do for October, because Halloween is my favorite holiday. Please, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you feel so inclined, and remember to drink more coffee, read more books, and don't forget to sleep. And I will see you in the next video, guys. Thanks.